Admiral Kethera stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last city on his homeworld disappear in flames. The Devourers had come like a nightmare from the void. These weren't ordinary enemies that could be reasoned with or fought using normal tactics. They were something far worse. The biomechanical creatures moved like living machines, consuming everything in their path. They ate planets, stars, even space stations made of the strongest metals. Nothing could stop them. The Catheri had ruled the galaxy for over 2,000 years. Their weapons could crack moons in half. Their shields could withstand the heat of dying stars. But against the Devourers, all of that meant nothing. Kethera's claws shook as he reached for the emergency beacon. In all of Cathari history, no admiral had ever sent a distress call to other species. They were the protectors, the strong ones. Other civilizations came to them for help, not the other way around. But pride meant nothing when your entire species was about to die. The message went out across the galaxy on all frequencies. Every advanced civilization would hear it. The proud Cathari Empire was begging for help. On the water world of Aquanis, the fish-like Myrthani received the signal and immediately called an emergency council meeting. The insect warriors of the hive world stopped their territorial wars to discuss this new threat. Even the ancient crystal beings of Nexus Prime, who rarely spoke to younger species, began urgent communications with their neighbors. Fear spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. If the mighty Cathari couldn't stop these what hope did anyone else have? The Cathari military was legendary. Their battle fleets had kept peace in the galaxy for centuries. They had technology that other species could only dream of, but now they were running out of time. The Devourers moved from system to system, growing stronger with each world they consumed. Intelligence reports showed the swarm was heading toward the galaxy's core, where billions of civilizations lived in peace. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to discuss their options. Some suggested combining all their fleets into one massive armada. Others wanted to evacuate to nearby galaxies. A few even proposed surrender, hoping the Devourers might show mercy. But deep in the discussion chambers, one question kept coming up. What about those primitive humans in the Outer Rim? They had just discovered space travel. Surely they couldn't help with something this dangerous, could they? The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with panic. Representatives from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy sat around the massive circular table, but nobody had any good ideas. The Myrthani delegate kept repeating that their underwater cities might be safe. The Hive World generals wanted to build a massive wall of ships around their territory. The crystal beings suggested everyone should just run to another galaxy. 3 days of meetings, and still no real plan. Every species was terrified. The Devourers had already consumed 12 star systems since the Cathari sent their distress. Call time was running out, and the galaxy's greatest minds were stuck arguing about who should sacrifice their fleets first. That's when the communication console lit up with an incoming message. The signal was weak, coming from the Outer Rim territories, where only primitive species lived. The Council's communication officer almost ignored it, but decided to play it anyway. The voice was calm and clear, speaking in perfectly translated Galactic Standard. This is Admiral N.A. of the Terran Defense Force. We have received the Cathari distress signal. Coordinates received. Help is coming. The chamber fell silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter started. The Hive World General was the first to speak, his mandibles clicking with amusement. The humans. Those apes who just figured out how to leave their own star system. The Myrthani delegate joined in. They still use chemical rockets for most of their space travel. What are they going to do? Throw rocks at the Devourers? Even the usually serious crystal beings seemed amused. These creatures have been in space for less than a century. They have never even seen a real space battle. The Council President, an ancient reptilian creature, shook his head sadly. The humans don't understand what they're offering to fight. The Devourers are not some local pirates or rebels. They consume entire worlds. But in the depths of space, Admiral Kethera heard the message differently. His people were dying. His children, his mate, his entire civilization was about to disappear forever. When you're drowning, you don't care if the hand reaching down to save you looks small. Against the advice of his surviving officers, Kethera transmitted the exact coordinates of the Devourer swarm to the human signal. If these strange creatures wanted to throw their lives away trying to help, at least they deserved to know where the enemy was. The galaxy's leaders continued laughing, but Kethera wasn't laughing anymore. Something in that human admiral's voice sounded different. It sounded confident, deep inside an asteroid that looked like just another space rock. Admiral Na placed her hand on a scanner that had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. Red lights flashed throughout the hidden facility as Project Olympus came online. This was humanity's greatest secret, and today, the galaxy would finally see what Earth had really been doing all these years. The asteroid's outer shell began to split apart like a giant metal flower. Inside, sleek black warships hung in massive docking bays that shouldn't have been possible to fit in such a small space. But these weren't ordinary ships, and this wasn't ordinary technology. Captain J stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Yamato, watching his crew prepare for launch. The ship looked nothing like the bulky vessels other species used. It was smooth and predatory, like a shark made of living metal. The hull seemed to bend light around it, making it hard to look at. Directly across the solar system, similar scenes played out in dozens of hidden bases near Jupiter's moons. Massive shipyards that had been disguised as mining operations revealed battlecruisers that could punch holes through space itself. Behind Saturn's rings, carriers emerged that could launch fighters capable of traveling faster than light without engines. Earth's governments had been lying to their own people for decades. While civilians thought humanity was still struggling with basic space travel, military scientists had been reverse engineering alien technology from crashed ships and intercepted transmissions. They had learned things that would have terrified the Galactic Council. Admiral Na's fleet began moving toward the edge of the solar system. These ships didn't need the slow hyperspace lanes that other species used. They could tear holes in reality and step through them, where normal ships took weeks to cross between star systems. Human vessels could make the journey in hours. Captain J watched Earth shrink behind them as they accelerated. His weapons officer was a young woman named Sohee, who had trained her entire life for this moment. Her targeting systems could lock onto enemies from different dimensions. The chief engineer, Min Woo, had engines that could turn black holes into fuel sources. For 50 years, humanity had been listening to alien communications, watching their wars, studying their weaknesses. Every species in the galaxy thought humans were primitive creatures who had barely learned to leave their planet. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The hunt was about to begin, and the Devourers had no idea what was coming for them. The massive human war fleet suddenly appeared at the very edge of Cathari space, their ships emerging from the twisted corridors of hyperspace like ghosts, materializing from another dimension. What they saw before them was pure nightmare fuel. Enormous creatures that looked like someone had crossed alien biology with deadly machines, systematically eating entire solar systems like cosmic locusts. These weren't just destroying planets. They were literally consuming everything: stars, moons, asteroids. Even the empty space between worlds seemed to shrink as these biomechanical horrors fed. Whole civilizations that had existed for thousands of years were being digested in real time, their light snuffed out forever. Commander Min stood on his command bridge, watching the horror unfold through the main viewing screen. His weathered face remained calm, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the railing. Behind him, dozens of crew members worked frantically at their stations. their faces illuminated by the red glow of combat alerts. The swarm noticed them immediately, like a single, massive organism. Thousands of these devourer creatures began turning away from their feast and moving toward the human fleet. Each one was the size of a city, covered in writhing tentacles and pulsing with sickly organic light. They moved through space as easily as fish through water, defying every law of physics humanity thought they understood. "Sir, they're approaching. Fast," reported his tactical officer, sweat beading on her forehead. "Estimated contact in 3 minutes." Min watched the approaching wall of death with the same expression he might use to check the weather. These creatures had destroyed entire galactic civilizations without breaking stride. They had consumed species that had mastered technologies humanity could barely imagine, but they had never faced humans before. "All ships," Min's voice carried across the fleet communications with deadly calm, "weapons free." What happened next changed everything. Beams of pure stellar fire erupted from the human warship's energy so concentrated it could melt through solid metal like butter. These weren't ordinary weapons. Human engineers had somehow captured the power of stars themselves and turned it into instruments of war. The energy beams sliced through the devourer ranks like a hot knife through soft cheese. The creatures that had seemed invincible moments before began exploding in brilliant flashes of light. Their biomechanical armor, which had withstood attacks from dozens of advanced civilizations, crumpled under the human assault. For the first time in their long, destructive existence, the devourers experienced something completely foreign to them: fear. The swarm that had never retreated from anything began pulling back, their confidence shattered by this unexpected resistance from a species they had dismissed as primitive. Captain High's science vessel hung dangerously close to a dying red giant star, so close that the ship's hull glowed white-hot from the stellar radiation. While other captains might have considered this suicidal, High saw it as an opportunity. Her engineering team had spent months developing something that should have been impossible, a way to turn an entire star into a massive weapon. "Stellar conversion array is online," her chief engineer reported, his voice tight with nervous excitement. "We're literally about to weaponize a sun." The massive mechanical arms extending from High's ship began drawing energy directly from the star's core, channeling forces that could power entire civilizations for centuries. The dying star, which had been slowly fading for millions of years, suddenly blazed with renewed fury as human technology forced it to release all its remaining energy at once. Meanwhile, Admiral Na's main battle fleet was preparing something equally impossible. Her ships had deployed weapons that most scientists said couldn't exist. Torpedoes that could actually bend and twist reality itself. These weren't just explosives. They were devices that could rewrite the basic laws of physics in small areas of space. "Reality distortion, torpedoes armed and ready," Na's weapons officer announced. "Target the largest devourer clusters first." What happened next defied everything anyone thought they knew about warfare. The star-powered beam from High's vessel struck the devourer swarm like the fist of an angry god, while Na's reality-warping torpedoes created pockets of space where the laws of nature simply stopped working. Devourers that had seemed indestructible suddenly found themselves in areas where matter couldn't hold together, where time moved backward, where gravity worked upside down. The creatures that had devoured entire star systems began falling apart at the molecular level. Their biomechanical bodies, evolved over millions of years to be perfect killing machines, couldn't adapt to spaces where physics itself had gone insane. They writhed and screamed across impossible frequencies as their very existence became unstable. Within just a few hours, something incredible happened. The Devourers swarmed, the unstoppable force that had consumed half the known galaxy, that had wiped out civilizations older than Earth itself, was completely and utterly destroyed. Not defeated, not driven away, but erased from existence so thoroughly that even their atoms were scattered to cosmic dust. Across the galaxy, on thousands of different worlds, billions of survivors watched their emergency broadcasts in stunned, absolute silence. Ancient civilizations that had hidden in fear for generations emerged from their bunkers to stare at empty space where the devourers had been just hours before. The impossible had happened. Humanity, the newcomers, the primitives, had accomplished what no one else could even imagine. Human medical ships quietly drifted through the wreckage of what had once been the Ketheri homeworld system. These weren't warships anymore. They were floating hospitals, their hulls painted with bright red, crosses and filled with healing equipment instead of weapons. Commander Bo walked through the medical bay, checking on alien survivors who just hours ago had been facing certain death. "How are they responding to treatment?" Bo asked the chief medical officer, watching as human doctors worked alongside alien healers to save lives that everyone had thought were lost forever. "Better than expected," came the reply. "Their biology is different, but our adaptive medical systems are learning fast. We should have most of the critical cases stabilized within the day." But while human medics worked to save lives, intelligence reports were flooding through galactic communication networks like digital wildfire. Every major civilization was desperately trying to understand what they had just witnessed. How had these primitive humans destroyed an enemy that had crushed empires spanning thousands of star systems? The answer, when it came, was more terrifying than the devourers themselves. Earth's history wasn't the peaceful story most species assumed. Intelligence analysts digging through human records found something that made their blood run cold. Humans had been at war with each other almost continuously for their entire recorded history. Not small conflicts, but massive, planet-spanning wars that would have destroyed most civilizations completely. Even worse, humans had an absolutely terrifying ability to turn literally anything into a weapon. They had weaponized diseases, weather patterns, even the atoms themselves. During their own world wars, they had created bombs that could level entire cities, using nothing but splitting tiny particles that most species considered harmless. "Look at this," one Cathari intelligence officer whispered to his colleague, scrolling through human military history. "They've had over 200 major wars in just the last 1,000 years. Most species don't survive one conflict that devastating. But the most chilling revelation wasn't their capacity for destruction. It was their capacity for restraint. Every other species in the galaxy had assumed humans were primitive because they seemed so peaceful in their diplomatic interactions. Now they realized the horrible truth. Humans weren't primitive at all. They were apex predators who had simply chosen to be gentle. Commander Bo's soft voice, as he comforted a frightened alien child, suddenly seemed infinitely more terrifying. This wasn't weakness. This was a creature so confident in its own deadly abilities that it could afford to be kind. Like a tiger gently playing with a house cat, knowing it could destroy the smaller creature without even trying. The galaxy had discovered that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't their star-killing technology or reality-bending torpedoes. It was their mercy, and the implied threat of what would happen if that mercy ever ran out. The ancient halls of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like this emergency session. Representatives from civilizations that had ruled the stars for millions of years sat in stunned silence, their elaborate ceremonial robes and crystalline communication devices suddenly feeling outdated and primitive. The massive chamber, built to intimidate visitors with its sheer scale, now felt small and inadequate. Council Elder Zixthera, whose species had dominated galactic politics for over 50,000 years, struggled to find words. "In 3 days," she announced to the assembled delegates, "everything we thought we knew about power in this galaxy has become meaningless." The holographic displays showed the brutal reality. Star charts that had remained unchanged for centuries were being redrawn in real time. Trade routes that had been controlled by the same civilizations for millennia were now under question. Military alliances that had seemed unbreakable just a week ago were crumbling as everyone tried to figure out where they stood in this new reality. Admiral Wu's human fleet continued their patrol of the former Kethari territory, and their presence alone was reshaping galactic politics. These weren't even the largest human ships, just regular patrol vessels, going about their routine duties. But every time a hostile species considered moving into the power vacuum left by the Kethari collapse, they would detect those human energy signatures and quietly change course. "They're not even trying to intimidate anyone," reported a Vorthan intelligence analyst to his superiors. "They're just ... there, doing their job. But everyone's terrified to go near them." The political reactions split the galaxy down the middle. Some civilizations immediately began drafting diplomatic messages to Earth, offering trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. Ancient species that had never bowed to anyone were suddenly sending their most skilled ambassadors toward human space with gifts and proposals. But in the darker corners of the galaxy, other civilizations were having very different conversations, in hidden meeting chambers and encrypted communication networks. Military leaders and political strategists were asking dangerous questions. How could humanity be stopped? What were their weaknesses? Could the other species unite against this new threat before it was too late? "We cannot allow one species to dominate the entire galaxy," whispered Korthok generals in their war rooms, studying tactical displays of human ship movements. There must be a way to level the playing field. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The same civilizations that had spent centuries oppressing smaller species were now desperately trying to figure out how to deal with becoming the smaller species themselves. The galaxy's power structure hadn't just shifted, it had been completely turned upside down in less than a week, and everyone was scrambling to find their place in this terrifying new reality. The galaxy held its collective breath as Admiral Na stepped up to the podium in the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers. Every species expected the same speech they had heard countless times throughout history, the victorious conqueror announcing their new empire, dividing up territories, demanding tribute from the defeated. It was the oldest story in galactic politics. Humanity had other plans. "We are announcing the formation of the Terran Protectorate," Admiral Na began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems to billions of listeners across known space. "This is not an empire. This is not a conquest. This is an invitation." The alien delegates shifted nervously in their seats. Invitations from militarily superior species usually weren't optional, and everyone knew it. But as Na continued speaking, it became clear that humanity was offering something that had never existed in galactic history: genuine choice. "Any civilization that wishes to join us will receive our full protection from external threats," she explained. "In return, we ask only for cultural exchange, shared scientific knowledge, and cooperation in maintaining galactic peace. No tribute, no surrender of sovereignty, no forced loyalty." Captain Tay stood up from the human delegation, adding his own perspective that sent chills through the audience. "We don't want to rule you," he said simply, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "But we won't let anyone harm our friends." The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Here was a species that could literally weaponize stars and bend reality to their will, offering protection instead of demanding submission. More terrifying still, they were making it clear that attacking their allies would be considered attacking them directly. Within hours of the announcement, the human communication networks were flooded with requests. The Altarian Federation, still recovering from Devourer attacks, was the first to formally request membership. Their message was simple: "We choose humanity's friendship over anyone else's threats." The Crystalline Collective followed immediately, their representatives practically racing to submit their application. Then came the Ethereal Wanderers, the Binary Worlds, and dozens of smaller civilizations that had spent centuries living in fear of larger, more aggressive neighbors. But the most surprising applicant was the Zephyrian Empire, one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations. Their formal request included a message that stunned political observers. We have ruled through fear for millennia. Perhaps it is time to learn what it means to rule through respect. The galaxy was witnessing something unprecedented, the birth of an alliance based on mutual benefit rather than mutual fear. And at its center stood humanity, the species that had proven they could destroy anything, but chose instead to protect everything. 5 years had passed since the formation of the Terran Protectorate, and the galaxy was barely recognizable. Where once there had been constant wars, bitter territorial disputes, and the ever-present fear of extinction, now there was something that most civilizations had never experienced before: genuine peace and prosperity. Admiral Ra walked through the corridors of the massive orbital medical station above New Kepler, checking on patients from 17 different species. The breakthroughs in universal medicine that human scientists had developed were saving lives at a rate that seemed almost miraculous. Diseases that had plagued entire civilizations for thousands of years were now easily treatable. Genetic disorders that had been considered death sentences were being cured with treatments that seemed like magic to most alien species. How many lives have we saved this quarter? Ra asked her chief medical officer. Just crossed the billion, Mark Admiral, came the reply. And that's just from the medical stations. The agricultural improvements and clean energy programs have probably saved 10 times that number. On distant worlds, human agricultural specialists were teaching alien farmers how to grow crops in previously barren soil. Human engineers were building clean fusion reactors that could power entire planets without pollution. Human teachers were sharing knowledge that was advancing civilizations by centuries in just a few years. But peace, as humanity had learned from their own history, was always fragile. The warning came from the deep space monitoring stations at the galaxy's edge, long-range sensors detecting massive distortions in dark space, the empty void between galaxies. The energy signatures were disturbingly familiar, like echoes of the Devourers, but somehow different, more organized, more purposeful. Admiral Na stood in the command center of the flagship Terran Guardian, watching the sensor data stream across multiple displays. Her staff worked with quiet efficiency around her, their faces serious, but not panicked. They had been through this before. Multiple galaxies are sending distress signals, her communications officer reported. Whatever's out there, it's hitting multiple targets simultaneously. Na studied the tactical displays, watching as red warning markers appeared across the galactic map. Other civilizations might have debated, formed committees, or waited to see how bad the threat really was. But humanity had learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was overwhelming offense applied as quickly as possible. Prep all ships, Admiral Na ordered, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had become humanity's trademark. Deploy the full battle fleet. Send word to our allies. Anyone who wants to come along is welcome, but we're not waiting. She paused, looking out at the stars through the bridge's main viewport, and allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere out there, another group of threats was about to learn what humanity was really capable of. The hunt continues.